What's up, folks? This is Justin Garcia, aka Master Chim, and with me I have a very excited about the guest that I have today. He's helped me out a bunch. He's done some coaching with me on my new language learning adventure, and it's Matt from Refold. And Matt versus Japan is his YouTube. Hey Matt, why don't you say what's up to my guys?
Hey, yeah, really excited to be here, and thanks so much for having me on.
No, I appreciate it. I've watched so much of your content. And the one thing I could promise you is that you haven't had a talk with anybody like me yet. Right? So, there's a first time
Cool.
for everything. Um, let's get, I mentioned this to you earlier. I know who you are in the language learning world. You have a lot of clout and a lot of notoriety, but to the people outside who I'm, very eager to introduce you to, give everybody, if you can, just a brief backstory about how you came to be the language guy.
Yeah, so I'd say, when you look at the kind of language learning YouTube landscape, a lot of the big figures are popular because they've learned a bunch of languages. But my style is that I learned Japanese and I learned it to a really high level that pretty few people have reached. And I'm all about trying to like really master one language instead of getting, pretty good at a whole bunch. And how that came about for me was that when I first entered high school, I just happened to kind of come in contact with Japanese and just felt this pull towards the language that uh, wasn't something I could explain logically or anything I had a real good reason for. It was just a pure kind of emotional passion type of thing where I just knew this is what I want to do and I want to do it really well. So I dove right into the language. And actually, for the first couple of years, I didn't really know what I was doing. But around the 2 year mark, I discovered this blog called All Japanese All the Time that talked about a really unorthodox radical method of language learning where you pretty much completely surround yourself with the language, even if you don't understand it. And for the most part, you try to absorb it in a similar sort of manner that we all learned our first language. Now, there was some more kind of structure to the approach, such as using flashcards with, well, using what's called a spaced repetition system, which is a special type of flashcard with a built-in algorithm to help you study with maximum efficiency, and a few other components of the method that I'm sure we'll talk about. But through basically dedicating my whole life to Japanese for 5 years, doing this all Japanese all the time style of approach, I was able to reach this really high level. And after that, I decided that I wanted to share what I had experienced and all the things I learned from the experience, all the things I had to kind of tweak and figure out for myself with all the other people out there who wanted to do a similar sort of thing. So that's how I started my YouTube channel a couple of years ago. And then just earlier, well, I guess late 2020, I started Refold, which is kind of the culmination of all my experience learning Japanese to a really high level, where I take the kind of broad and amorphous method that was all Japanese all the time, and I add in some more structure and some more basically, well, I guess structure is the main word for it, so that it's much more like a roadmap that anyone can go and follow and achieve the results that they want without feeling like, they're kind of sinking, trying to swim, trying to learn how to swim while they're sinking, I guess.
Right on. So, the first parallel right off the bat is, I run I don't know if you know this, but I run a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy in the Bronx, New York, and have for 20 years, and 20 years running a school. There are people who similar, we'll say the kids, the children who learn a lot of organic jujitsu because of, they're very, their cup is empty, as you could say,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not unlearning anything. They're not relearning anything. They're just learning things for the first time and building relationships for the first time. And they have that sort of authenticity in their relationship with jujitsu. With adults, however, we need a little bit of strategy. We need a little bit and we need systems, and we need a sort of format, and logistics matter. And so I get the need for people to, okay, it's like, yeah, well, I want to learn another language just like kids. It's like, okay, step one, be a kid. Step two, have parents of that country and
Mm-hmm.
be in there. Like, so there's not as much overlap as people I think would conveniently want there to be. And the fact that you've devised an approach to presenting that process, I think supports that notion that it isn't just, just hang around with the language all day long and you'll get it. It's like we want a little bit more speed, maybe optimize it, a little bit more bang for the buck, right? So
Yeah, totally.
so what right now, because I want to get into where you were as opposed to where you are now, but I actually want to start with where you are now. How does somebody learn a language?
Yeah. So in Refold, the overarching framework is that we break the whole learning process from the very first day you start all the way to reaching native level into 4 stages. So you start off in stage 1, which doesn't look too different from what you'd find in a language classroom, I guess. There are some differences, but basically you're learning, first of all, you learn what sounds are used in the language, you learn the writing system of the language, and then you're learning the most common, 1 to 2,000 words, and you're also learning the basics of the grammar. Now, the main difference between Refold and what you're going to find in a language classroom is that although you're doing these similar activities of learning the writing system, learning the common words and the grammar, in a traditional language classroom, the purpose of that in that setting is to help you become able to speak. And right from the beginning, you're encouraged to speak a lot by doing this kind of thing where you think in English or whatever your native language is, and then you translate your English thoughts into something that kind of looks like your target language by using these grammatical formulas that you memorize. And that works to an extent, but it's very limited. First of all, it's very slow, but also because every language is so unique and unpredictable and precise, if you're thinking in one language and using basic principles to translate into another, the result is going to be very awkward and unnatural. You're not going to sound native-like at all. And so in Refold, instead, you're learning all of these things for the purpose of improving your comprehension of your target language. And we say it's through learning to comprehend your target language at a really high level that you start to build an intuition for that language and start to be able to kind of mimic it in a more organic way where you're not actually translating in your head. You're learning to think in the target language the first time and be able to speak naturally in a more direct way.
All right, so let me ask you then. So that's stage 1 of learning, similar, a lot of overlap to a traditional, language class. In the application of that stage, according to your Refold method, what does that look like for somebody learning a language?
Yeah, so one other thing I'll mention before I kind of give the overview of stage 1 is, although those are the kind of core activities, there's this other additional core activity you're also doing right from the start that we call immersion. And immersion can mean different things to different people, but in Refold, immersion just means spending time in an authentic way with your target language. So really, this is the most important component of the entire language learning process. You're never going to be able to learn to understand a language, let alone speak a language, without spending hundreds or thousands of hours actually spending time with that language. So right from the beginning, we recommend starting to spend time basically watching TV shows in the language, or listening to audio in the language, just to get your ears used to it, to start setting up the habits of spending time in your target language really regularly. And at the beginning, it's okay to use English subtitles, even though, in our opinion, when you watch target language content with English subtitles, it doesn't actually teach you very much, because a lot of times you end up just kind of reading the English and phasing out the target language audio. It's still helpful for the purpose of kind of breaking your addiction to watching full English content and set up the habits of regularly spending time in your target language, as well as kind of discover content in your target language that you're excited about that you can then go back and watch later without the subtitles. So with that said, what it looks like when you're in stage 1 of Refold is that basically, one more component I just realized I forgot to explain, which is the SRS, otherwise known as a spaced repetition system, which is basically a type of digital flashcard program that has an algorithm that basically predicts when you're going to forget all the flashcards that you have in your system, so that it can show you those flashcards before you forget and basically help you maintain all your memories as efficiently as possible. Because you don't want to do redundant review. You don't want to be learning things or reviewing things you still know really well, and you don't want to be forgetting things because then you have to relearn them later. So basically, due to this algorithm that someone created based on human memory that exists within this type of program, you can make lots of flashcards, and then you review the flashcards and you tell the program how well you remember each one, and it uses that information to calculate the optimal next review. So all you have to do is show up every day, do all the reviews that the program is saying you should do that day, and as long as you do that, it guarantees you around a 90% retention rate, with a fairly small amount of reviews. So the specific spaced repetition program that we recommend at Refold is called Anki. It's a free program. It's the most popular one out there. It's also used a lot by medical students who also have a lot of stuff they need to memorize. There are other spaced repetition systems out there, but we recommend Anki. Even though it's a little bit hard to get into, it's not the most user-friendly program. It's very versatile, and once you do figure out the program, it really allows you to do a lot of powerful things with it. So with that said, what it looks like is, well, when it comes to learning the sounds of the language and the writing system of the language, that depends a lot on the specific language, because some languages like Japanese and Chinese have a really complicated writing system that really, it's kind of a whole other story. But if you're learning a language more similar to English, like French, German, Spanish, or Portuguese, learning the sounds in the writing system will only take like less than an hour, really, right? Because it's so close to English. So that's something you can just sit down and get out of the way first thing. And then you can kind of either create, well, ideally you can find a flashcard deck for Anki. For the program Anki, people make flashcard decks that you can download. So you can download an Anki deck that has the most common words in the language, and you just start memorizing those. You can do like between 10 and 20 a day. And then also find a basic grammar guide and start reading through the grammar guide for, 10, 20, 30 minutes a day. Just start getting that basic knowledge about the language, and then also start trying to spend, maybe 30 minutes plus time just watching a TV show in your target language. And like I said, it's okay to use English subtitles. Right. So that's really what stage one looks like in practice.
So Anki, I started using, you and I had a session on my language journey, and it helped tremendously in how to best leverage Anki. I will tell people, you guys watching and listening, that there is a little bit of a learning curve, but you get over it. And the one great thing about Anki, and really a lot of the language learning world to begin with, there's a lot of open source stuff. There's a lot of, like, Anki is not only open source software, but there is so many applications that have followings that you will see a university collection of instructionals on how to use Anki. A lot of medical students, a lot of people that are doing, a lot of language people. So once you get over it, Anki has been an absolute, just powerhouse tool that I've used. You also told me to, and in our conversation, I started watching a couple of YouTube personalities, and I have a plugin that I use. Can you go over how the plugin works? Is this past? I don't know if this is past stage one. It's all a blur to me still. But, So what do you think about that?
So you mean the language learning with Netflix and language learning with YouTube?
Right.
Yeah. So how about I introduce stage two first? Because that would, I think, be a good.
I knew I was going to fuck that up.
Good transition. No, it's all good. Yeah. So basically, yeah. Like I've talked about, stage one is kind of building a foundation to prepare yourself for just kind of diving into the deep end of the language and learning from the language itself. So this is when Refold really diverges from the traditional pathway. Whereas in a language classroom, you can take years upon years of language classes, and you're never really thrown into the true language itself. Like, you're never just told to go read a book in the language, go watch a movie in the language, go have a real conversation. It's all kind of this fake watered down version of the language, like textbooks and like artificial dialogues created specifically for learners that are way simpler than real life. So in Refold, after stage one, which only takes a couple months, you're then just diving into the deep end, and you're basically finding real authentic content in your target language. In the very beginning, it's okay to use things like graded readers or TV shows meant for younger children, just to help get some momentum, get started. But you really are just consuming real content and then learning from the content itself. And the way that you do that, the way that we recommend, is watching target language content with target language subtitles. So you could be watching a Portuguese movie with matching Portuguese subtitles, or a YouTube video, or a documentary, anything really. And so what you're doing is, there's a few different modes of active immersion, but the essence is you're looking lots of words up, and then when you find kind of a sentence that is really ideal for teaching you a new word, you're going to take that sentence and then make an Anki card for it. So you're switching from just learning a pre-made deck of Anki cards or learning a list of common words to learning the words that you personally pick out yourself from authentic content. And this has a lot of benefits. It basically really helps integrate your study which is the work you're doing in Anki, with your immersion, which with the organic process of contacting the language. And a lot of times the words that are going to be most relevant to you are going to be different than the words that are relevant to someone else. Totally depends on the specific content you're consuming. And the content you're consuming is going to depend on your interests and your overall plan and priorities and things like that. So the plugin that you just mentioned, there's kind of a pair of plugins. Or I guess extensions technically for Chrome. They're made by the same people. One of them is for YouTube, one of them is for Netflix. They're called Language Learning with YouTube, Language Learning with Netflix, I'm pretty sure. And basically what it allows you to do, it's kind of has a whole set of features, but if you can find a YouTube video with matching subtitles, not all YouTube videos, in fact, most YouTube videos don't have exact matching subtitles, but some of them do. And when you find one that does have matching subtitles with this add-on, there's a lot of features. Like, for example, you can have it pause automatically at the end of every subtitle line so that you can take your time to look up the words that you don't know in the line. It also allows you to instantly look up words just by clicking on them. And you can also save sentences to kind of like a bank of sentences so that you can put them into Anki later if you want to. So these features just make it a lot easier to engage in this process of, as a beginner who still isn't going to be understanding that much, still find your way, not be totally lost, look up lots of words, get a gist of what's going on in the plot, and kind of find your way in the language.
Yeah, to me, it was a definite boost of energy in the process itself for me, because I felt like I was actually listening to somebody who was just talking to other native speakers. Obviously, I'm learning Brazilian Portuguese, and I'm like, this isn't special, ABC 1, 2, 3 for an English guy. This is an actual Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese guy to Brazilian speakers, who are just absorbing content. And it allowed me to start filtering that information that way. Now, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet that I think is worth bringing up before we get too far is you don't advocate speaking output. Now, that is something that is going to throw people for a loop a lot of times if they've never been exposed to Crashing and your work, people like who have some data behind this. But can you explain why it doesn't do anybody any good to start talking, or what good it does and what good it doesn't, I should say?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So this is probably the out of all the kind of tenets of Refold, the one that's the hardest for people to swallow initially, the most counterintuitive. But basically, I think the easiest way to approach this is through Stephen Krashen's framework of learning versus acquisition. So Stephen Krashen is a linguist who is still doing some work today, but I think his most important work he was doing in the 70s. And he came up with this model of how language acquisition really works. And that's what Refold is based on fundamentally. And Stephen Krashen says that there's two different ways that a person can go about trying to attain language ability. One is through learning and the other is through acquisition. Now, these terms can be used in many different ways. In this context, I'm just specifically referring to Stephen Krashen's model. So in this case, learning is gaining conscious knowledge about the language, and then basically trying to use this conscious knowledge to translate your thoughts into the language and do what I explained earlier, where it's what you'd be doing in a traditional classroom. And it's very limited in that, if you're translating in your head, it's very slow. And also the result's going to be unnatural because languages are just so fundamentally different from one another that if you're starting with one and translating into the other, the result isn't going to be natural native-like output. So that's learning. Then on the other hand, we have acquisition. So this is actually a subconscious process of your brain basically building a model of how the language works. And once this model is built, then you can use that model to speak in a kind of natural, intuitive way without having to think consciously about what's going on. So this point right here is probably the most counterintuitive because it almost sounds like magic, right? What we're basically saying is if you consume a lot of content in your target language, and actually it can't just be any content. What Stephen Krashen tells us is that language acquisition happens when we consume comprehensible input, which means that we come in contact with sentences in the language where there was some part of the sentence that our brain hadn't yet acquired, but due to the context or the surrounding context, we can infer what that missing part means and kind of therefore figure out something that we didn't know before. And it's when coming into contact with this comprehensible input, this input that contains something that we didn't know, yet we're still able to grasp, that language is acquired, and this acquisition is happening on a subconscious level. So consciously, we could just be kind of really deep into watching a movie and be really into the plot, not even be thinking about the language consciously. Yet subconsciously, our brain is assimilating. It's drawing these inferences and assimilating the knowledge into a model of the language. So one example to kind of try to explain what acquisition is in English. If you're a native English speaker and I asked you, what sounds more natural, the red big dog or the big red dog?
Right.
You'd be able to tell me that the big red dog sounds more natural, but you probably wouldn't be able to explain why. Now, the true reason why is there's a really complicated grammatical rule that has to do with the order of adjectives when multiple adjectives are modifying a noun. Like, I don't even consciously remember the order. It's like people, age, color. Like, there's this really complicated like hierarchy of categories of nouns. Yet, whenever you're speaking, you're able to effortlessly put your nouns in the right order. And when you hear someone put nouns in the wrong order, you can feel that it just doesn't sound quite right. Like the red big dog, it just kind of feels like, no, it's big red dog. You want to put it in the right order. So consciously, you don't know the rule. You never learned it. No one taught it to you. You literally never knew it. But somehow you do know it deep down consciously, and you access it through the form of intuition. You just know it feels right and feels wrong. So some point when you were a child, if you're a native English speaker, your brain figured out this rule on its own through getting comprehensible input, and you've benefited from that. So Stephen Krashen tells us we still have access to this really powerful unconscious part of our mind that figures out how language works, and we can access that by feeding our brains comprehensible input. So basically, when you learn how to speak through acquisition, it's an entirely different thing than learning how to speak through learning. When you're learning, it's a very conscious process where you're thinking in your native language, you're trying to translate results, you're thinking about the rules and all these things. When you acquire, then when you eventually are ready to start speaking, you're not thinking about the rules. It's just like in English, you know what's right and what's wrong, and you can feel it, but you don't have to think about it consciously. Mm-hmm. And this is the only real way to speak a foreign language like a native speaker, to really sound natural, to be quick, to be witty. The learning, it's just too limited. It doesn't work. And so that's really what, if you want to achieve true fluency, what you're after is acquisition, but the trade-off is that it takes some time. There's kind of the results can be delayed. With learning, you can go to your first class and you can memorize a bunch of phrases, and then you can go home and tell your friends, hey, check out what I learned today in Spanish class, and show off those phrases. Whereas when you're taking an immersion approach that's based around acquisition, it's going to be quite a while before you have something to show for it, because you have to wait for your unconscious mind to build a whole new model of how language works that's very detailed and fleshed out before you're going to be able to have anything to show for it. But when you finally are ready to output, which happens in stage 3, you're going to sound way better than people who were taking classes. It's not even going to be a comparison. So that's why, at the beginning, that's why I say there's no point of speaking early on, because that's when you try to speak early on, it's not based on acquisition, it's based on learning. And that's a totally different process that is ultimately a dead end.
Right. And, when I first heard it explained, and I think it was one of your videos that I heard the explanation, it's like, yep, that makes sense. A parallel that I have in my own, different application is raising my kids, right? So I used to fight professionally, I've been a black belt for a long time, and, I know jujitsu, and I raised my kids. They go to my school every day. They've been going since, they're 3, and they have me, and my wife trains also. So they grew up around jujitsu, but their technique is very, elementary. And a lot of that, when I try to explain it to people, is they need to be athletic. They need to be physically resilient. They are building all of these tools that eventually the technique will start expressing itself when they're ready. But I'm not going to be, hey, look, I got the best 8-year-old in the country, because that 8-year-old is usually in jujitsu going to stop training by the time he's 13, so because he's burnt out and his ability to express jujitsu is limited at what he acquired until he was 8, right? So in language, I see that offset, right? So my father is from Puerto Rico, right? And when he came here from Puerto Rico, he came to New York when he was 15. And at 15, he didn't speak a word of English. And one of the points of pride that he had by the time I came around in his 30s was he spoke English. It sounded like James Earl Jones was talking to you. A very baritone, deep, but perfectly articulated English with no accent, no residual anything. And it was a point of pride with him. So I know that he probably invested a lot more energy into the process because he had that standard. Whereas I look a lot of his younger siblings, some of who were born here, weren't even born in Puerto Rico, they still have a little bit of an offset in the language. And for me now, looking at the sort of, to reduce it to a dichotomy, do I want to acquire the language or do I want to be able to ask the waiter for food on this vacation I'm going to the month from now? It's hard. And I'm sure it is for you. Like, it's hard for me to sell people in jujitsu. Like, listen, you're going to suck for about 3 years, but that fourth year is going to be a doozy. Nobody wants to do that, right? Well, it's very hard also to tell somebody how to imagine in language. You're not allowed to talk. You're not going to be able to show off everything you're learning. And there's going to be some pressure during the initial processes, but I promise you it'll pan out, right? So talk about how you have, or have you had some difficulty in, or do you at least understand the difficulty in the sell of that process?
Oh yeah, I mean 100%. I mean, the funny thing is, when I first started my YouTube channel, I never thought I would even reach the level of audience that I have now. I thought I was just going to be speaking to like the couple, maybe 10 people out there who wanted it as bad as I wanted it and were willing to like go all in on the process. And back then I was even more extreme than I was now. I was like, it's not even worth doing this unless you're going to dedicate your entire life to this for at least like 5 years or something. So I've actually softened up quite a bit to the point where now I'm like, yeah, you can balance this with other things in your life. You don't have to completely dedicate yourself to it. You don't have to try to be going after native level. You can still, basically have a more balanced life and achieve a strong level of fluency. It still takes a lot of dedication. Like we're talking 3 hours a day, ideally minimum. So that's still a huge amount of dedication. That's more than most people put towards their hobbies, right? That's still pretty hard to do at the end of a long work day, but it's possible for most people out there who want it badly enough. And I definitely don't expect, even though I have softened up quite a bit, and that has allowed me to reach a larger audience, I definitely don't expect it to be for everybody. I think most people who claim to want to learn a language, if they really understood the level of commitment that it would take to reach the kind of results that they're imagining, they would realize they don't really want it badly enough. And that's totally fine, right? I also think that there's kind of this vibe recently that, everyone should learn a foreign language. You're not cultured if you haven't learned a foreign language. I don't really buy into that. I think that actually, if you know English, you have access to most of the important information that exists in the world right now. With just due to historical kind of circumstance, English is kind of the lingua franca of the world right now. It's where most of the important stuff is happening, and so and also just the time is so limited in the day, right? So there's so many other things that some people might want to do, whether it's learn an instrument, learn martial arts. And so I think it's fine for a lot of people to not learn a language, and that most people who think they want to learn English probably don't. But there still is enough people who are serious enough about learning language and are also fed up with hearing the bullshit of, oh, you can do this in 5 minutes a day by just downloading my app. People who are serious have gotten to the point where they know that doesn't work, right, and that it's a waste of time. And so just by kind of speaking the reality of it, I think I've been able to attract an audience of those people who are serious about it and appreciate the non-bullshit approach.
Right on. And I agree. I think that if people really understood that it's like things cost things. Like, and again, I'll use a jujitsu analogy. I'm trying my hardest not to get you to be pressured to badmouth any other apps or anything like that. So there's going to be a lot of metaphor and analogies. In jujitsu, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, listen, I want to learn how to fight. I want to learn how to defend my family. I want to learn. It's okay. These are the things that, that we're going to have to do. And I'll set them up. The formula is already there. It's proven. People just like you have done what you're saying you want to do here, right? However, there are people that, in my line of work, I want to get to the UFC. And after talking to them for 10 minutes, I tell them, well, the only fucking way that's happening is if you buy a ticket, and sit down and watch the fucking show, because there's no way you're going to be able to do what it takes to get there. So how these distinctions are made in goal setting and language, let me ask you this for everybody to hear. what is your level of Japanese by the standards or criteria of native Japanese speakers? Like, what's the feedback you get?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times if I'm speaking on the phone and it's on a topic that I'm comfortable with, I can get a Japanese person to assume that I'm probably just a Japanese person, not a foreigner. And like I'm dating a Japanese girl right now. She doesn't
Atta
speak
boy.
English. We we only speak in Japanese, and it doesn't really most of the time it doesn't really feel like I'm speaking a foreign language. And I think she forgets that I'm also not a native speaker. I'm definitely there's definitely weaknesses that I have that most native speakers don't have. There's still holes in my knowledge that I'm still striving to improve. So I'm by no means perfect, but for the most part, I can do all the things that I want to do. And the fact that it's not my native language isn't an impediment anymore. Like especially reading is something that is really my strong suit. I can really just take most books off the shelf and read them no problem without a dictionary, as if they were my native language.
Right on. And I want to bring up two things. The first thing is, first off, growing up in New York, specifically the Bronx, there are people who their native language is their fucking target language, right? It's like, they don't have a fluent understanding of the only language they got. So it's a process that even just people naturally are going to continue in their own language. So that's to be expected. The other thing that I was reminded of is I remember once having a conversation / debate. I really like the guy I was talking to. He's a researcher from the Mayo Clinic. And we were talking about, are you familiar with the Turing Test?
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you who don't know, it's sort of like, can AI get to the point where it could fool people into thinking it's not an artificial intelligence, that it's actually the other people will think that it's a human, and he was saying it's impossible. And he was saying because there's always going to be an offset, right? And he wasn't using that terminology. He was using something like volition, like machines won't have volition. But basically, according to my terms, he's saying there's always going to be that offset, meaning it's always going to be a robot. So we're always going to be able. And I said, no, it'll pass the Turing test as soon as it can fool you. It doesn't have to be a human. It just needs to fool you. And I was reminded by that in this process of learning Portuguese, because one of the things that I want to be able to, because like you don't look Japanese, I mean, you got the Akira and the samurais, like there's some legit, street cred there, but I could pass for Brazilian. And how I see that, and my wife's Brazilian, so like half my family, my in-laws are all Brazilian. How I see that is just another way that I can experience the culture. I can experience the relationships, is that there is going to be a level of overlap that allows me to experience it at a level that somebody who just wants a functional level of communication is always going to be missing. So when I set my goal for acquiring Portuguese, it was really that full experience. I mean, you have a Japanese girlfriend, so like there's a certain level of function that is waiting for somebody who has that level of authentic, capability in the language. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I mean, I can only really speak when in terms of Japanese culture, because that was what I experienced. But there's definitely basically as my Japanese ability has increased, the treatment that I get from Japanese people has totally changed. And when you're at a kind of mediocre level of Japanese, and I think this definitely applies to most cultures to a certain degree, you actually get a ton of praise, because when you're mediocre at Japanese, they see you as a foreigner. And so they're like, oh, wow, this foreigner can actually speak Japanese. And then Japanese people tend to have very low expectations for foreigners when it comes to learning the language. So even if you just know a couple words or you can have a basic conversation, they'll be like, oh, wow, that's amazing. You're so great at Japanese. You're so smart, all these things. And the better you get at Japanese, the less they are viewing you as a foreigner who learned Japanese, and more they're just viewing you as a person. And just like how when a Japanese person talks to another Japanese person on the street, they don't congratulate them on their Japanese ability. They just take it for granted.
Great
the same
sense.
thing starts to happen.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's like we're not doing that to each other in English either. No, So it's a little different because of course, like you mentioned, I don't look Japanese. So a lot of times they'll still be like, oh, what? Like, did you grow up in Japan? Like, how did this happen?
Are you half Japanese? I'm sure you got that.
Yeah,
before.
yeah, I get asked that a lot. And I'm like, do I look half Japanese? They're like, no, but how else could you explain it? So,
Right.
but yeah, the better you get at the ability, even with the looks, the more quickly they get over it. and they just start to view you as a person, and you start to have a person-to-person relationship instead of a Japanese to American person relationship. And I think that's really where all the meaningful stuff happens when it comes to connecting with other people.
Right. That's awesome. So that being said, then there are going to be things that, I mean, if we're covering all the bases, somebody who just wants to speak, just wants to understand, because there are a lot of people in the language community who, you know, they aspire to or have already achieved a polyglot status, right? And polyglot, I mean, I don't really know the definition of polyglot, but is it just somebody that knows more than two languages? Is there like a specific standard?
There, I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's more like 3 or 4 languages, but I'm pretty sure that's debated of like how many languages do you need to know to be a polyglot? How well do you need to know a language before you actually can say you know it? I don't think there's any agreed upon definitions, but it's somewhere in my sense is it's somewhere around the 3 to 4 languages that you could, if you're like fluent in 3 to 4 languages, then you're a
Right.
legit polyglot.
And would you be willing to say, I don't think this is controversial, that you are able to experience Japanese culture and even the language itself at a higher level than somebody who is maybe fluent in Japanese, but certainly not at the level that you've, you know, worked to get?
Oh yeah, I mean 100%. But it's important to say here that not all polyglots are the same. There's some polyglots out there, like for example, Luca Lampariello, who I've done a video with, who are true language learning athletes, and they've gone to a similar level of depth that I've gone to Japanese in multiple, like 3 or 4 different languages. Now, these people, they're not doing language learning as a hobby. Their whole life revolves around language learning. They move to these countries, they live it for their entire life for multiple years at a time. They're not just, dilly-dallying with whatever feels interesting that day. So there are polyglots who still go all the way, reach that level of depth where you're approaching a native level in the language and really connecting with the culture. But from what I've seen, especially in the YouTube polyglot sphere, that's the minority of people. Most people, they're kind of learning languages to a pretty mediocre level where, it's kind of fishy whether they're really fluent or not. In most of their languages, they're really kind of dabbling in the European framework. Maybe they know a couple languages at the B2 level, and most of their other languages are on the A1 or A2 level, which isn't that high. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the way of engaging with the language, with these languages that overall gives them the most fulfillment. Maybe they have a real kind of intellectual curiosity with the language, like a kind of linguistic curiosity, or maybe just, they get satisfied after learning the basics of the language. So I don't want to invalidate that as a way of engaging with languages. I think that's totally legitimate, but it's a completely different thing than trying to go really deep on one language to the point where, when you're talking to, and you can have any conversation you want with a native speaker and your language ability isn't an impediment at all. And you really see the culture from their point of view to a large extent.
Yeah. And, I got that from you when I started listening to your videos, because I didn't know who you were. I told myself I was going to do this, and it's because I just had too much free time and I wasn't feeling enough pressure. So I was like, fuck it. Been meaning to do this forever. Been married to my wife almost 18 years. Like, I have my mother-in-law who stays at my house for 3-4 months at a time. And we still have like the fucking charades conversations after all this time. And I figured, okay, enough. I gotta square this away. But one of the things that really attracted me to your message was, number one, worth mentioning, I had you coach me in how to learn Portuguese. You don't even speak Portuguese. So it speaks to the universal formulaic nature of your approach, which I appreciated. But you're also not somebody who is a polyglot, not that you would even, claim to be one, like, because you couldn't even claim to be one, because Japanese at, no pun intended, a black belt level, right? But now you are learning Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Now, explain to people what Chinese has been like, because here's the thing that I found unique, and I couldn't wait to ask you this. Learning Japanese was a very younger, a much younger Matt, just saying, I'm going to fucking do this. Like, you went, I think you studied abroad for a year and you came here, AJAT, all Japanese all the time, go, 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 super psycho. I'm going to learn a language mode. But now you are, Refold, Matt. Now you are, I understand a lot more. So you've had the opportunity to walk the walk. What has that experience been like with you so far for Chinese, and where are you in your Chinese development at this point?
Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely been very different for all the reasons you just said. When I was learning Japanese, I was in this psycho mode where it was all I was doing, to the point where I would actively avoid English. I would, if I could go a whole day without speaking or hearing a word of English, that was like 10 out of 10 day for me. So I was pretty I think it's fair to say I had an unhealthy mindset going at this thing. I was a little too extreme. I wouldn't recommend that for most people. And because of that, in a way, it didn't require a lot of discipline. Just all of my mind was on the same page. There was no conflict. There was no, oh, really, I want to go watch this thing in English, but no, I'm going to be a good boy and doing Japanese. I didn't want to see English. All I wanted was the Japanese. So in a weird way, it didn't take very much discipline. Now that I'm doing Chinese and I'm only spending, maybe an hour or two per day on it, and I have a lot of other things going on in my life, I'm still doing Japanese, I'm working, have relationships, all these other things going on. It actually has been taking a lot more discipline to not kind of fall off the horse with the Chinese, because when it's just one out of many things going on in your life, it's easy to neglect it. And what I found is that I really had to kind of engineer a new strategy and a new relationship with the language to make it really work. Because in Japanese, I was improving so quickly because I was putting so much time into it that it just created this sense of exhilaration that was able to continue to fuel me. Whereas it's a lot more slow, basically, when you're just doing an hour or two a day. And so I kind of came up with the strategy of just committing to a very limited amount every single day. Like I would learn 5 words in Anki every single day. I wouldn't skip a day. And over time, through doing that, I was able to build up some momentum, really feel my progress, and then get excited about it. Because it's really that point of feeling that you've made progress and then imagining what would happen if you put in even more time and got even better, and getting excited about that potential future of you being good at the language that makes you want to put in the time. And so, yeah, it's been a totally different experience. But now that I have built up some momentum, especially in the last 6 months, and I've started to be able to understand more, it's gotten to be really fun. And I'm kind of at the point now where I can watch TV shows in Chinese and understand the plot and actually like get into the TV show, actually wonder what's going to happen next. And so it's been really fun. And one other thing I'll mention is that a big shift also was that when I was learning Japanese, I was very goal oriented. I was very much like, okay, I know where I'm trying to go and I'm trying to get there as fast as possible. Whereas Chinese, because I'm moving slower, because I'm doing less every day, I kind of had to shift my mindset from trying to kind of count down the days until I hit my final goal to just enjoying the day by day process, really, and be excited for the progress that I'm making, want it to make more progress, but not have it be about reaching some final point, and just have it be about the fact that feeling regular improvement is in itself satisfying.
Right, right. So one of my sayings is movement is mandatory. And as it would apply to this is because I found times where it's like, okay, I'm going to do some stupid language app for 20 minutes because I don't fucking feel like doing whatever else was on the agenda. And I will do it because it's something to do. And it'll usually give me enough of a reprieve to build up the energy to get back on track. So I always tell people, like, listen, so long as you keep moving, that's the thing. You want to move at the point where you're feeling a little bit of pressure, but you don't want to move or try to move at a pace that's just not sustainable, and you just wind up not doing anything. Now, what I wanted to ask you is, I remember before I met my wife, I just purchased the Pimsleur Japanese set, right? And, I was, a jujitsu guy at that point. I, wanted to go to Japan, and, Kurosawa is my favorite actor. Zatoichi is my favorite, like, Japanese TV show. I still watch them. And it's, Japanese has always been a big part of, who I was, only because of the martial arts thing. I wanted to be a ninja in the 80s, basically it started at, and it sort of grew from there. But when I bought Pimsleur, I remember the first fucking thing on the first like Japanese Pimsleur lesson is it was Nihongo ga wakaramasen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't speak Japanese. And I thought, what a crock of shit. I don't need to know how to say I don't speak Japanese. All I got to do is fucking talk, and they're going to know that. And very early on, I remember it being a put off because the phrases they were sharing, I'm like, this is nonsense. I'm not going to learn. I'm just going to memorize fucking sayings. And if they're off script, I'm going to be like, a fucking robot at like a McDonald's order kiosk. It's like, I could just order what you want to eat. Don't ask me about my day, because I have to stay on script. So I was turned off by that. The reason I bring that up, aside for entertaining the listeners of the video, is a lot of shit out there is shit. What is the offset, or what is it that people need to realize? Because we made the distinction, I think fairly, that you don't need to be Matt versus Japan level, Japanese speaker. There is some utility based on the individual of just, being, inquisitive and having a functional level, whether they misrepresent themselves on YouTube or not. But what about the people who maybe just want that functional level of the language, but they're still going about it all fucked up because they're succumbing to this just incredibly high level marketing attacks of these people? So what would you tell those people? Like, don't do this. And you don't have to say specifics. I don't want you getting all jammed up, but just like conceptually, like guys, this isn't going to work.
Yeah, well, so the way that I think about it is that we talked about how Refold aims for acquisition rather than learning. And because of that, it's a fundamentally different approach. And in this fundamentally different approach, although the results are way better, they're very delayed, and it takes a lot of upfront investment before the results really come. And so I do think there's kind of a minimum level where if your final goal is below this level, then it doesn't even really make sense to go for this acquisition-based approach. And you are better off taking a more traditional approach where you're using the apps and stuff like that. So that level would basically be what I call basic fluency. Now, everyone defines fluency different, but basically, I should probably come up with some kind of questionnaire where it's like, hey, if you answer no to any one of these questions, then Refold's not for you because your goal is not doesn't really align. But basically, like if you want to be able to watch a movie in your target language and not have to use English subtitles and still like comfortably be able to know what's going on. If you want to be able to have a real meaningful conversation and not constantly be feeling like, oh, fuck this, I can't say what I want to say. If only this person spoke English, we could actually go deep on this conversation. If you want to be able to get past those things, then I'd say what you're looking for is what I would call basic fluency. And that is kind of the minimum level that Refold is built for. I'll actually mention that we talked about how Refold is 4 stages total. We talked about the first 2, which is building a basic foundation and then building comprehension through consuming authentic content in the language. Stage 3 is when you finally learn how to speak really well, and the end of stage 3 culminates in basic fluency. And some people will be satisfied with that, and they'll be like, okay, I got what I wanted. There's a lot I can do in this language. I'm pretty solid, and now I'm going to go and either learn another language or do something entirely different. But for the people who want to take it really far, like I did for Japanese, there's stage 4, which is really trying to bridge that gap between basic fluency and native level. So Refold does handle a whole range of final goals, ranging from basic fluency to the highest levels of language ability. But for people below whose goals is below that level of basic fluency, then yeah, you might be better off just kind of getting an app and learning some basic phrases. And that way, when you visit that country, you can greet people in that language, and that will show, a lot of times native speakers get excited even if you just know a couple words, right? It shows that you're interested in their language, that you're going out of your way to kind of meet them halfway. Or if you want to be able to order at a restaurant, or be able to ask for help in an emergency, something like that, ask where the train station is or something like that, then yeah, you can get a basic app like probably Duolingo or something like that, and just learn the phrases, and you'll get something out of it. So I do think there is a role for that, but their marketing they're like the opposite of Refold. Refold is saying, hey, this is what it's good for, this is what it's not good for. Implicitly, their marketing is saying like, yeah, no matter what your goal is, use our app and use it forever. And in fact, they like try to addict you by making it as fun as possible with games and things like that. Right. Whereas in reality, those apps are very limited in how far they can take you. And although for some people that is actually going to make sense for them, most people, for anyone who has higher aspirations with the language, then it's really, those apps are just a waste of time.
Right. So, to try to have the people who are listening to this wrap their head around a couple of the things that I've realized with this. Like, there's a difference between, I'll use English as an example, it's the only fucking language I speak. Somebody who has a very high education in the language of English, but forever will sound like he's from another country. there will always be that offset in their experience because of that offset in their ability to basically share and project the language that is on par with the people who are receiving it. So I understand that there are people out there who are like, yeah, well, I know a guy like my doctor who's from Poland is, he's much more educated than I am, has a better vocabulary in English than I do, but he sounds like he's from not here, and it's just a goal thing. Now, some of those, I'm going to throw Duolingo out there. That seems to be the whipping post of the language community safely. They'd have to sue a lot of people before they'd sue us. Like I'm pretty certain, and again, I'm not a language expert. I only speak one language, but from what I gather, like you're not going to become fluent in a language doing Duolingo, right? So what can you say? Can you talk about Duolingo specifically? Because I think that's a safe one as a sort of representative of these, monetized, approaches that people are doing to language learning that is just not functional.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that people they're not very critical about the language learning process. They confuse making true progress with feeling like they made progress. Like, for example, a lot of people, these apps, they're very gamified. They have lots of results. They give you lots of numbers, they give you gold stars and all these things. And so they kind of feel like, oh, the app told me that I learned a lot, or the app told me I made a lot of progress. Therefore, I must have made a lot of progress. And they just take what the app's telling them to be the truth, rather than actually going and reality testing their ability, right? Instead of asking themselves, what can I actually have a conversation with a native speaker? Can I watch a movie? Can I watch a YouTube video and understand what's going on? They don't try to do any of these things. In their mind, they're putting off the reality testing to some point way in the far off future once they're already fluent. They have it kind of reversed. They're like, okay, first I'll get fluent, then I'll go and actually spend time in the language. Where in reality, how are you ever going to get fluent without having already spent thousands of hours with the language? It's totally reversed. So in their mind, they kind of put themselves in this bubble where they never reality test their ability, and they take what the app is telling them to be the truth. Where if, of course, the app is going to tell you you're doing great, their goal is to have you spend as much time on their app as possible so they can show you lots of ads and make money off of you, right? Or just charge you money directly. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that there's lots of YouTube videos of people who have like 700-day streaks on Duolingo. They don't speak the language, right? They know a bunch of words and phrases and stuff, but if you actually go and watch some of these videos, some of the people are more self-aware and they're like, yeah, I did Duolingo for 700 days and I still can't do shit in the language. And other people are like, yeah, it was a great experience, I learned a lot. And they kind of are oblivious to the fact that if they were to reality test their ability, they would realize they virtually can't do anything meaningful in the language. So I think that's what it just comes down to, is if you want to know how effective a method is, go and look at the people who use that method and check out their results. Now, the one caveat is that there's this phenomenon that I call the fluency illusion, which is that if you don't speak a given language, you can't judge someone's ability in that language. So if you're not really fluent, and if you're not as fluent in Japanese as I am, or at least close to that level, you can't actually judge whether my Japanese is good or not. Like, for example, a lot of people, they hear me speaking Japanese and they're like, oh, wow, it sounds so authentic. It sounds so real. You don't have an accent at all. It
sounds real as fuck. I've heard you speak Japanese. And I'm like, that's Japanese. He's got it perfect.
Yeah, it's like, well, for all you know, what if I was speaking Japanese with a Korean accent? Would you be able to tell? Like,
that's right? A mind fuck.
Yeah, it's like, what if I'm making grammar mistakes? What if I'm using words unnaturally? Really, when people see someone speaking a foreign language and they're getting impressed by their fluency, they're judging off, do they appear to be speaking like quickly and effortlessly, right? So I could speak gibberish quickly and effortlessly and make you think I'm fluent in French, potentially, right? If it sounds even somewhat close to French. So it's important to keep this in mind when you're looking at other people's language ability, and know that really, if you want to know how good someone is, you have to ask a native speaker. So if you want to know how good I am at Japanese, you can't just judge based off the fact that I appear to be speaking fluidly and effortlessly. You have to actually take a video of me speaking Japanese, show it to a Japanese guy and say, hey, no bullshit, how good is this guy? Like, if you closed your eyes, how obvious would it be that he's a foreigner? And when you hear that response, that's what's going to tell you how good I really am. And so if you go and take this kind of rigorous method of reality testing people's ability, or just testing people's ability, and you try to compare the people who've taken a more immersion style method like Refold versus people who've done a bunch of language apps and stuff like that, it's not even going to be close. And probably this will even be obvious without doing the rigorous testing. But if you include that in it, then it'll just be obvious that someone who's done like everything that Duolingo has to offer 3 times through are still not even going to be close to someone who's taken an immersion method. They're really going to be still like toddler level or below in the language. That's just the reality.
You know, it's funny because now you're starting to see, or I've found it in the world of YouTube, the phenomenon of native speakers judging the efficacy of a second or a polyglot's acquisition of their language. Like basically, oh, this guy knows Chinese, I'll let you know if he knows Chinese. and they're doing that. And I find it funny too, because the person who's saying it, who does, a lot of these people that are doing it on YouTube, they either don't even speak English or their English is horrible, but they keep it real. They know their English is horrible. And they're saying, yeah, he sounds like I do in Chinese, or he sounds like I do in whatever language, So it is something that, one of the great things about large numbers, right? The law of large numbers is that you will see a pace of evolution where these things a lot of times are self-correcting to the point where people are at least going to know somebody's full of shit at some point, because there's just going to be too many people involved in the game, right? So that's one of the things that, I give you a lot of credit for, is that you've managed to invest an amount of time in getting to a level that nobody could basically accuse you of being inauthentic. Because when you know that level of Japanese, or at least I'm trusting that you know that level of Japanese, you could say, well, this is what I don't know. And you could be real about it. But if somebody's like a YouTube polyglot, and as opposed to a polyglot on YouTube, a YouTube polyglot, they have to keep the bullshit game going. So they have to go to different restaurants. They got to go to different, places. And it's really what you're seeing after a while is just the shock of native speakers going, oh shit, this guy's trying to speak our language and he knows a couple of words. That's cool. So there's just that difference, So when I look at the people who are trying to learn another language, which is something that I've never really dealt with in my, my following, I have a newsletter, and a few thousand people on the newsletter. I got my YouTube channel. I never spoke about language, but to me, again, there's so much overlap into so many other things I spoke about. The authenticity is longevity, right? So it's, if you want to do this for any length of time and achieve the benefits that provides, I'm not saying you have to have one goal over the other, but you have to be authentic, right? So I will say, where that's concerned, people who are listening to this, don't do Duolingo. Don't do these things that you have a bunch of programmers that sat down with a bunch of high-level marketers who are skilled in NLP and game theory and, persuasion methods, and all of these things are like being put together into this technological potion, and you're drinking it and you are in a fog. You have to stay connected to the thing, right? You have to stay connected to the thing. So another concept that, that I mentioned in my book, it's a big part of my formulas, is the feedback loop of reality, right? And it is, in fighting, I'll give you the application in fighting. Like my three criteria to tell whether or not a martial art is bullshit, right? So the three steps. Step one, do they have a system, that they can call their own? They have to have a ritual that's unique, that they manage to, to label it. So do they have a system? Number two, when they spar, when they do the thing, do they use their system, right? So if you are the, we're going to, thumb kung fu style, and as soon as you go to fight, you start slapping and doing all this stuff, it's like you're not using your system. So it's like, the big X, bullshit system. But the third one, if you meet the first two criteria, is if you are fighting, on average, somebody who's untrained, do you win? Because if you lose every fucking fight while trying to do the system, it's still a bullshit martial art. So there's that last sort of criteria that needs to be met. Well, with language, as I see it, your criteria, which makes sense, is go fucking speak it. Go with somebody who, what I told you that made me excited when I was listening to the Brazilian guys, it's like he doesn't know that I'm secretly listening to him and I don't speak his language, because it was authentic engagement with the raw, organic, language itself. And the people who are trying to avoid that, because listen, it's intimidating, it's embarrassing. There are times where I will admit I've asked my wife what a word is, and because I didn't pronounce it properly, her first reaction was to correct my pronunciation. And I like turned into like a 3-year-old throwing a tantrum. I didn't fucking ask you how to pronounce it. I asked you, you know what I meant. Don't. And it's like, I get it. This is a big vulnerability and exposure to one's ego that you have to embrace, but it's funny, as soon as you stop trying to not be embarrassed, that you let go of all that bullshit and just release yourself to the process. It is such I think, an enjoyable process, once it's at that point. Where do you see the people who, with everything that I just said, the people who continually have an issue with that, what would you advise them?
Yeah, well, that touches upon another really important principle of Refold, which is what we call tolerating ambiguity, which is basically being okay with not understanding, with not knowing what's going on, and being confused. Because well, first of all, it's something that we're kind of trained to avoid, I think, through the process of just formal education and in the United States, at least, probably other places in the world as well, where we're taught, don't go on to lesson 2 until you've mastered lesson 1, because it's going to hold you back. Like, never be, if you see something you don't understand, never just let it be. Always go in and perfectly clarify it. And we become kind of afraid of not understanding, almost allergic to not understanding. And so people have a freak out if they try to watch something they don't understand at all, or if they don't totally get how a grammar point works or what a word means or something like that. But in reality, if you want to get to the point where you can understand a language at a high level or speak a language at a high level, that's going to require spending hundreds and thousands of hours with the language. And if you're spending hundreds of thousands of hours with it, there's going to be tons of stuff you don't understand. It's only through going through all this not understanding that you get to the point of understanding, right? It's like if someone were going to say, oh, I'm not going to jump in the pool because I can't swim yet. I'm not going to go and jump in the pool until I've already mastered swimming. It's like, well, then you're never going to learn how to swim, right? It's the same thing. If you never go and jump into the reality of the language until you can already understand, you're never going to get to the point where you're understanding. And so a lot of times these people, I think the reason why they get so attached to the apps like Duolingo is because it makes them feel like everything's under control, right? The app doesn't show them anything that they can't understand. And it's feeding them this kind of artificial watered down form of the language that makes sense to somebody who hasn't spent a ton of time with the real language. And so it's a real big slap in the face to kind of go from that app to just trying to watch a movie, and then suddenly you don't understand almost anything, maybe 1-2% if you're lucky. So a lot of times people's response to that is just immediate rejection of being like, oh no, I'm not ready for this. This is too overwhelming. They go back to the app, and they hope that if they just spend enough time with the app, eventually they'll be able to bridge that gap. But there's no way to bridge the gap. You have to just jump into the reality the first time and really, I guess, learn how to swim while you're drowning. That's basically how it works. And so that's why becoming okay with not understanding is such an important part of the process. And the trade-off is that although, yes, it's very uncomfortable and disorienting to be in contact with so much that you don't understand, when you do understand something, it's much more gratifying because it's something real. And this is what you mentioned a couple of times, right? When you understand a piece of real Portuguese coming from a person who you actually find interesting, who is speaking to a native speaker audience, they're not dumbing it down for you, and you actually grasp what they said, even for a single sentence, that's really exciting. And it gives you the sense of oh, wow, if I could grab this one sentence, I could probably, grasp a couple more if I keep working at it. If I can grab a couple more, then I can just keep going and going until eventually it all makes perfect sense. So that's the kind of trade-off when you're dealing with what is real, when you're in contact with reality, right? The kind of punishment that when it slaps you in the face, it hurts more, but when you get it, then it's much more gratifying.
That's right. Right on. That's a great take. I might not be able to use this analogy if science keeps going in the direction it does, but one of the things I often use is the metaphor of, if I wanted an apple, I could go and I could find an apple tree, and I could wait for an apple to be ripe and fall, or maybe pluck it off, and I have an apple. If I wanted to expedite that process, I could get a plot of land, plant, some apple seeds and grow apple trees and control this thing. But if somebody came to me and said, Justin, you're wasting your time. Why don't you just make the apple? You'd look at them like, what do you mean? You can't just, like, there is an inherent irreducibility to a certain point where there has to be an organic process. And we haven't gotten smart enough or capable enough to go beyond that in a lot of different applications. And I still think language is the apple tree to some extent, where, yeah, we could try and control the controllable, but ultimately we need to dance with reality, and we need to get out there and allow the thing to teach us, not somebody else's reflection or interpretation of the thing. We have to touch it ourselves, right? So that is like in martial arts, it's do you spar? And if you spar, if you get your ass kicked, you suck. It doesn't matter how great your kicks look and, all these different things. That's a different thing. If we're talking about fighting, you got to be able to win a fight, right? So do you see, and because I'm sure let me ask you this. The majority of people that you work with, I'm assuming these are Japanese students.
Maybe like 60, 70%.
All right. That's actually lower than I thought it would be. Because your Japanese is so fucking good. And I know you've come from this world of just, crazy AJAT guys. What is your experience when trying to explain this to people who are learning different language? So I came to you, teach me how to learn Portuguese, right? And you did. You revealed the process without you ever knowing it, because the process is universal. How is it with other people from other languages that come to you with that same type of approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, when it comes down to it, languages have much more in common than they have different from one another. It's kind of like, you talked about, maybe we could say learning Japanese is like planting an apple seed and growing an apple tree. Maybe learning Portuguese is like growing an orange tree, right? Most of it's the same when it comes to like what you actually do, right? You plant the seed, you give it sunlight, you give it water, all these things. So really, like every language does have some unique challenges and difficulties, but the vast majority is the same, right? Because it's this process of coming in contact with the language and allowing your mind the opportunity to kind of figure it out for itself, right? Or said another way, we all learned our native language in the exact same way, right? Through listening to our parents speak it for thousands of hours. So what I find actually is that in a lot of ways, it's almost easier to work with people who are learning a language more similar to English, because basically what determines how difficult a language is to learn is how similar or different it is from the languages you already know. So if you're a native English speaker and you're trying to learn a language like Spanish, French, German, Portuguese that have a lot of overlap and commonality with English, then it's only going to take a fraction of the time that it would take to learn a language like Japanese or Chinese that are just completely foreign, because you're really starting from scratch when you're learning a language like Japanese or Chinese. Whereas if you're learning a language like Spanish or German, you can reuse a lot of the English kind of architecture you have in your mind. So everything is sped up, and that makes it easier to grasp the process, right? When the results come quicker, then the understanding of the process comes quicker as well. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because at the same time, when the languages are more similar, the shitty methods kind of work. Like it's harder to understand so clearly why the traditional method doesn't work. It can take a little bit more time. Whereas with Japanese, the traditional methods just get you nowhere. So it's really easy for people to realize, like, I need to fundamentally change my strategy if I want to really get this thing. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But overall, I find that, yeah, the results come so much more quickly with like European languages that it can be easier to work with people.
Right on. So, all right, I'm going over my notes here, making sure I covered everything I did. That I wanted to, rather. All right, favorite anime?
Ooh, maybe Neon Genesis Evangelion, first thing that popped up.
Okay. I am a terrible anime fan. The first anime I ever saw was Ninja Scroll, and every anime after I watched that one, I just thought sucked compared to Ninja Scroll. So do you have enough anime knowledge to suggest an anime that I should watch to fall in love with anime again?
That's hard. I know of Ninja Scroll. I haven't seen it myself, so it's hard to come up with something that's the same. How about, like, have you ever seen Ghost in the Shell, the original movie?
I haven't.
I imagine you would like that, especially, you showed a little interest in AI, and stuff like that. So I think you'd appreciate that. The original, I think it's maybe 1994 around there, by Mamoru Oshii.
Awesome. Favorite Japanese movie?
I have a lot of Japanese movies that I like. Let's see. I mean, a lot of the Japanese movies I like are like very Japanese. So I feel like if you just watched it out of the bat, it would seem really weird to you. But
I think you think that they all don't seem really Japanese to me. Like, there might be a lot more of a general relationship I have with it, regardless of the movie. So, what is your favorite, and why would you say that?
That's hard. It's hard for me to like come up with. Like, hold on, okay, let me just roll. Let me open up my movies folder. I gotta
do it up.
Gotta. Because I actually watch quite a bit of Japanese live action movies. Let me see.
That's so funny that I guess we have so many animated movies now. We have to say live action movies. That's not like the default that we assume anymore. Movies with people.
Yeah, especially like, a lot of Japanese learners, they're really into anime. They don't like live action stuff as much.
Right.
But let me see right here. Okay, here's a really fun Japanese movie I think anyone could appreciate. It's called Tampopo from 1985, and it's about a woman who decides to train and become like a master ramen chef.
Nice.
And her whole journey of learning all the things that go into that.
Can you spell that in English for me?
Yeah, Tanpopo.
All right, Tampopo. Awesome. All right, last thing. People who listen to this interview and they're like, holy shit, I had no idea language learning was so amazing, and they want to find your information. What is the website for Refold?
Yeah, so it's refold.la. You could think of it as LA for language. .com was out of our budget, maybe sometime in the future. But that's pretty much everything you need on there. Of course, I also have my YouTube channel, Matt vs. Japan, where I cover a lot of the same ground in video form. On the website, we cover the general principles, the general outline, whereas on my channel, I tend to do like deep dives in very specific topics. But there's a lot of overlap. And we also have a community for Discord, a community for Refold, which consists of multiple interconnected Discord servers. There's one Discord server for each popular target language, and we're making more and more of them. So if you want to connect with other people who are using this method and just, share content or ask questions and get direct help from someone who's more experienced, then definitely check that out. There's a link on the Refold website.
I've actually done it. I'm not embarrassed to say that I had to watch a YouTube video on how to use Discord. So I did that. I got on, I asked a question. Somebody was very nice and answered it. And I said, thank you. I think that's regular Discord protocol. We still say thank you. And it was like there's so many fucking people there. It's like, holy shit, this is a thing, So it was yet another thing. I'm like, this is awesome. There's like this whole crowd I can go to if I have a quick question and I want to answer. So refold.la, guys could, go there, go on the Discord. Matt has a Patreon. What is the Patreon?
Yeah, Patreon is patreon.com/refold. It's also linked on the bottom of the Refold website. And yeah, we have exclusive content on there. I do monthly Q&As. We also do monthly live streams where we talk about the kind of behind the scenes of what's going on at Refold. So yeah, definitely check that out as well if you're interested.
It's amazing too. And I'll say this for you because you wouldn't. Like, guys listening, Matt shares all this shit for fucking free. Like everything that, like, he went over all this stuff today. Like, you guys don't understand. I made him take my money so that I could just be stingy with him for an hour to go over a bunch of specific stuff to me. But there's nothing that we went over that I couldn't have gotten on the material that he just has available. So if you guys are interested, definitely go there because Matt is as authentically engaged in this process as anybody you'll find. And if you get something out of it, go to his fucking Patreon, you cheap fuck. Pay Matt and his buddies some money to continue doing what they're doing because it's incredible. And I will say, and I'm not asking you any political questions, but I want to say this to my listeners. The world is going fucking crazy. If there's one thing that I've gotten out of this language process so far is that it allows me to fall in love with something that isn't connected to any of the negativity and the bullshit that is out there. you know. So Matt, I appreciate you coming on. I knew it would be a great talk, and I hope you had as good of a time as I have. Thank you for being on, man.
Yeah, thanks. It was really fun.
Awesome.